Hi everyone, this is Bay Lights with Gary and Charles, and believe it or not, we're on episode 10, and today we have a topic that I'd like to introduce and discuss somewhat with Charles, of course, and I think it could turn into a series depending upon what the audience reaction is. And we do want your reaction to this. So, our main focus, in case you haven't noticed, we've been kind of a little comedy, but mostly society and culture. And today, we'd like to introduce a series called War or Peace. Again, War or Peace, not War and Peace by Tolstoy. And the two questions we'd like to examine, and we want very much to hear from you and your feedback on it, is question one: is the world already in World War III, or are we about to have this happen to us? And number two, now what was number two, Charles? The number two was...
let's just leave it with number one.
Okay, maybe just leave it with number one. Oh, yes. And number two is the U.S. facing right. Civil war in the near future. Okay. So those are the two questions. And so let's talk about one first. I mean, I've been listening to quite a few podcasts myself. Some of it were quite very interesting. In fact, one this morning from a professor who was speaking at Oxford about the history of war. I'm finding that very interesting. And of course, we look at the newspaper every day, much to my particular chagrin, and kind of cringe about what is going on in the world. So I think that's why I'd like to hear from you. And first, Charles, what do you think is going on here? I mean, what's your take of this situation?
If someone would have told me that they, some years ago, that they thought that we were marching towards possible war in any way, shape, or form, I would not have believed them. But if I look back at the history in Europe, Russia, and the United States and all that, I would say I think we actually are in the middle of war. And it's really painful to say that. And what I mean by that is that I think that we were very, very mistaken way back under the Bush administration and Obama to think that we could have some sort of an accommodation with Putin. That in some way we could integrate Russia into the EU or into NATO or whatever. I think we were very, very naive, and I tend to think that Putin may have talked nice when he first started his first term, but I think he has been planning on confronting and fighting against the West in as many ways as possible ever since he got into office. So this former KGB man who, I guess, was posted in East Germany, I think that this man has always had a dislike, a distrust, and a hate towards the West. and unfortunately has always been somebody who we can't trust. And he's been planning his moves against Europe, the United States, for some time, all this time actually. And he has also been planning on working with Iran, as well as China and North Korea, in undermining our current Pax Americana. I think he's extremely dangerous, and I think that we most definitely must, in whatever ways we can, stand up to Putin, stand up to Russia, in a very serious way. I think that we did not anticipate how Russia would work with China and Iran and North Korea to further its goals of destabilizing the current world order. I don't think we thought of that at all. I also don't think that we imagined that Russia would be sending its Wagner Group soldiers into North Africa and elsewhere in Africa. I don't think we thought or realized that China would be moving to create as much influence throughout the world. I also think that at our peril, that if we don't support Ukraine, we are at significant peril for a variety of reasons, one of which, if Ukraine has to surrender or is taken over by Russia, I think Moldova, I think Poland, I think the Baltic states, I think NATO in general are in great jeopardy. I also think that China will feel emboldened to take over Taiwan and to make major incursions throughout Southeast Asia.
So this paints a pretty dire picture. So the question is, we move from what has been called the bipolar world, when things were so easy because, quote unquote, during the Cold War, we knew who the enemy was, they knew we were the enemy, and we realized that we had mutual destruction capability. So we were able to have peace, most people, most Western countries. Of course, there's never been a true peace around the world, but we've been for 70 years, no world war. 70 plus years, I guess it's 70 plus years.
Yeah.
So now we live in a so-called multipolar world. How do we rebuild our multipolar world so that our generation, future generations can sustain a moderate amount of peace? Of course, there's always been fighting. We know there's always been genocide and peace. Fighting all over the world, but it seems like we're really headed in the wrong direction.
Oh, we are headed
in
towards a direction of substantial instability if we don't support Ukraine wholeheartedly.
Yeah.
And in my view, that means pushing Russia out
So
of Ukraine.
How does the election? I know everyone. I've heard some podcasts today, as a matter of fact, concern in the EU, particularly about the U.S. elections and what that might mean towards that.
Well, what I would say is that if Biden loses, I think Ukraine is in peril, and I think NATO is in peril. And I think we are on the brink of calamity. So I believe that a victory for Biden is the only way to go, because that way we can strengthen the Ukraine, ensure a stronger NATO, and also make it clear to China that any attempt to invade Taiwan would be a major mistake. Now, I'm not against the idea of a multipolar world. I don't mind China being competitive with the United States economically and in terms of research and development and so on. Though I want fair trade, and I want China to obey the rules with respect to that. I don't want them stealing things like they do, stealing industrial secrets and so on. So I don't mind honest, fair competition with China. And for that matter, I would wish immensely that Russia had stability, that they had a stable government, not run by an authoritarian monster like Putin. But unfortunately, that's not the reality. One of the things I think I have to admit to, and that is some time ago, when we started to engage China, I was one of those persons who felt that engaging China and helping them create a middle class, even a strong middle class, would bring a greater chance of representative government in China.
You had a lot of people that believed the same thing.
I think a lot of us did.
Yeah.
And maybe it was wishful thinking all this time. Maybe we were very naive. But it's pretty clear now that the Communist Party of China is not about to loosen its grip. I also think that even though we may have criticized Bush for saying that he had looked into the eyes of Putin and thought that he could read him and understand him and so on. Again, that, a lot of us were hoping, and again, perhaps I guess it was wishful thinking, but a lot of us were hoping that in point of fact we could work with Putin. In both cases, we were dead wrong. And I think it's important for us as a people to understand that and to be a whole lot more realistic in dealing with Russia and China. In terms of creating a peaceful, multipolar world, it's going to take a while, and I believe that it's going to take maybe many decades, but we're going to have to, Putin's going to have to be retired in some way. And even if he goes away, who knows who will take over, if things won't be worse or whatever. And so that's a wait and see. Will the Communist Party be weakened anytime soon? Boy, I doubt it.
Yeah, I think it's a matter of somehow rebuilding trust, but I want to just get back to the points about China. Clearly, I think opening up trade and rapport with China back during the Kissinger-Nixon years, we all thought was a good thing. But I think clearly, looking back, hindsight is always easy. But even then, during, I was in a corporate job at the time, and I did see what was going on, and I felt uneasy about it. I'll tell you what I felt uneasy about. We can't just blame the Chinese. We have to look to what we did, okay? And whether it was naivete or greed or whatever, basically, we shut down a lot of the manufacturing in the United States because it was cheaper to manufacture in China, and the profit motive was a big driver there. Yes, there was a lot of benefits from that profit motive, particularly people that own stocks or were wealthy. But what it ultimately led to was a decimation of the middle class in the United States. 1.5 million jobs were lost in the United States for manufacturing. And even though that is really, given the number of jobs in the United States, is small, where that came from were regions where now MAGA has gotten control. I'll give you one example of that. Okay. The furniture industry in North Carolina, as a result, was decimated. All those jobs disappeared. There's hardly any furniture being made in North, and that was a very skilled, very vital manufacturing base. So, our corporations, our country was complicit in that, and it led to what we have today. But, there's no going back to that. But what Biden and the Democrats are trying to do is rebuild the middle class. Unfortunately, from our media, which I think is generally pretty toxic in my view, has not been emphasizing that. They have been emphasizing Trump's trial, constantly. And so people don't understand what is really at stake here with this country. And unless we wake up, we'll lose it all. And if you want chaos, we're headed towards that chaos.
So, thank you, Gary.
Yeah.
And at that, this concludes this first edition on this whole topic of war or peace.
Yes, and thank you, Charles. I'd like to hear more from our audience. Please send us your comments. Please be civil, and let's have a discourse on it.
Thank you, everybody.
Take care. Bye-bye.